The maintenance section of the academy was not a place where students normally went. It was filled with pipes and machinery that kept the station running. The air was thick and warm from all the equipment. The lighting was dim and full of shadows. It was the perfect place for something bad to happen where nobody would see or hear anything. Veltar stepped forward with his 2 followers behind him. His multiple eyes gleamed with satisfaction in the low light. He had planned this moment for weeks, choosing the location, carefully studying the patrol schedules, making sure they would not be disturbed. This section was far from the main corridors in a part of the station that most people forgot existed. The Keth commander felt righteous, anger burning in his chest. He was not a murderer, he told himself. He was a protector defending the academy from contamination. The human girl represented everything that was wrong with the galaxy. Violence, chaos, the refusal to accept civilized ways of doing things. She had to be stopped before she infected other students with her primitive thinking. Hana stood very still as the 3 aliens surrounded her. She was not afraid. Fear was something she had learned to control during her childhood. On Earth, where being scared could get you killed by any number of predators, instead she was calculating distances, angles, escape routes. The way a hunter studied terrain before making a move, Veltar began to speak, his voice echoing off the metal walls. He talked about the purity of the academy, about how it was meant for civilized species only. He explained how humans were too violent, too unpredictable to be allowed among the children of peaceful worlds. He said that sometimes sacrifices had to be made for the greater good. While he talked, Hana listened and watched. She noticed that Lieutenant Kex favored his left side, probably from an old injury. She saw that Sergeant Thon was breathing heavily, already tired from just walking down. Here she observed that Veltar kept his weapon on his right hip, where a right-handed draw would be natural but awkward if someone got inside his reach. The maintenance bay had only one exit. The blast door they had all come through. It was designed to seal automatically in case of emergencies to protect the rest of the station from explosions or hull breaches. The walls were thick, reinforced metal meant to contain industrial accidents. The floor was non-slip textured to prevent falls around. Dangerous machinery. What Veltar saw as the perfect trap, Hana saw as a confined space where larger numbers would not matter as much. She had grown up playing in caves and canyons where knowing how to use tight spaces was the difference between catching dinner and becoming dinner. The 3 aliens had size and weapons, but she had something they did not understand. They had knowledge of how civilized beings fought in open spaces with rules and honor and chances to surrender. They knew about military tactics and formation fighting and giving quarter to defeated enemies. They understood warfare as it was practiced between species that had moved beyond their primitive past. Hana understood violence as it existed on Earth, where there were no rules except survival, where mercy was something you could not afford, and where the only way to win was to make sure your enemy could not get back up. She had learned these lessons from nature itself, from a planet that did not care about honor, or fairness, or giving second chances. The first sign that something was wrong with their plan came when Veltar finally gave the signal to attack. Lieutenant Kex moved first, raising his energy weapon and firing at center mass. The bolt of energy hit Hana in the shoulder, spinning her around and sending her staggering toward the wall, but instead of falling down, she used the wall to steady herself, turning back toward them with something new in her eyes. Something that made all 3 attackers suddenly feel like maybe they had made a mistake. Sergeant Thon fired next his shot, catching her in the abdomen, doubling her over in apparent pain. The 3rd shot from Veltar himself hit her leg and should have sent her to the ground, unable to run or fight back. They had practiced this attack many times. They knew exactly how much energy it would take to disable a human without killing her immediately. What they did not know was that humans had backup systems. Systems that kicked in when the body was damaged, when survival was threatened, when the choice was between fighting and dying. Their bodies had been shaped by millions of years on a world that tried to kill them. Every single day, as Hana straightened up slowly, her wounds already beginning to clot and seal themselves. The three aliens realized they were no longer the hunters. They had just wounded something that evolution had designed to keep fighting no matter what happened to it. The prey had become the predator. Hana Park walked through the metal halls of the Galactic Defense Academy like she owned the place. The other students moved out of her way without even thinking about it. Their bodies knew something their minds had not figured out yet. This human girl was different from anything they had ever seen before. The Academy floated in space between 3 different star systems. It was huge, bigger than most cities, and filled with the best young fighters from across the galaxy. Every species that had joined the Galactic Alliance sent their strongest and smartest children here to learn how to protect their worlds. But nobody had ever sent a human before. Captain June Kim stood watching from the observation deck as Hana finished her morning exercises. The weights she lifted would have crushed most of the other students. The distance she ran would have killed some of them. Her heart rate barely went up during tests that left others gasping for air through their breathing masks. Other students whispered when they thought she could not hear them. They called Earth a death world, a place so dangerous that most species would die just from breathing the air. They said humans were crazy for living there, that only something wrong in the head would choose to stay on such a violent planet. They did not understand that humans had not chosen Earth. Earth had chosen them. The Academy had different areas for different types of students. The water breathers had their own section with tanks and pools. The high-gravity species had rooms with extra weight fields. The low-oxygen aliens had special air systems, but Hana just lived in the normal human section by herself, breathing regular air like it was nothing during combat training. She moved in ways that made the instructors nervous. Her reflexes were too fast, her strength too much, her endurance too long. When other students needed rest breaks every few minutes, Hana kept going for hours when they needed special equipment. To handle the training weapons, she used them with her bare hands. Commander Veltar of the Keith Empire watched all of this with growing anger. He had been at the Academy for 10 years, first as a student, then as an instructor. He believed deeply that some species were better than others, that civilization meant leaving behind the savage, violent ways of primitive worlds. To him, humans represented everything wrong with the galaxy. They were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too willing to fight when they should talk. They came from a world that tried to kill them every day, and that had made them into something that did not belong among civilized beings. The Keth were proud of their peaceful ways. They had not fought a war in over 1,000 years. They solved problems through talking and trading and making deals. They built beautiful cities and wrote poetry and created art that lasted for centuries. The idea that violent primitives like humans could be allowed into their sacred academy made Veltar sick. He started watching Hana more closely, looking for any excuse to have her removed from the program. He studied her files, her test scores, her training reports. He interviewed other students, asking them how they felt about having a human among them. Some said they were afraid. Others said they were curious. A few said they thought she was amazing. The breaking point came during a team exercise where students had to work together to solve a complex problem. Hana had been paired with Yuki Lee, a small, fragile student from the Zanari species, who was brilliant with computers but terrible at physical tasks. The exercise required them to climb through a dangerous obstacle course while solving math problems and hacking security systems. Yuki was struggling with the climbing part, stopping every few feet to catch her breath and shaking from fear whenever she had to jump between platforms. Instead of leaving her behind or getting frustrated, Hana stayed with her teammate. She carried Yuki when necessary, gave her encouragement when she felt scared, and made sure they finished the course together. They did not get the best time, but they completed the mission and both students were safe. Veltar watched this and felt even more angry. He saw Hana helping Yuki, not as kindness, but as showing off. He thought she was trying to make the other species look weak and helpless. He decided that something had to be done before this human corrupted more students with her violent, Deathworld ways. That night, he made his plan. He chose 2 loyal followers who shared his beliefs about species purity. Lieutenant Kex, a reptilian Sketh warrior who had fought in border conflicts, and Sergeant Thon, a heavily built Thurian who worked as Academy security. Both of them had been complaining about the human student since she arrived. They would corner her in one of the isolated sections of the station where the security cameras had blind spots. They would make it look like a training accident, something that happened during off-hours practice. Nobody would question the death of a human, especially when 3 respected Academy personnel said it was just bad luck. Veltar felt good about his plan. He was protecting the Academy from contamination. He was upholding the values of civilization. He was doing what needed to be done, even if others were too weak to do it themselves. He did not think about what it meant to corner a predator. He did not consider what happened when you tried to kill something that had spent its whole life learning how not to die. As Hannah finished her evening training session and walked alone through the lower levels of the station, she noticed 3 figures following her. She had grown up in the Australian outback, where noticing things like that meant the difference between living and dying. Her body started getting ready for trouble even before her mind fully understood what was happening. The 3 aliens stepped out of the shadows, blocking her path. They wore civilian clothes, but Hannah could see the way they moved like soldiers getting ready for a fight. She had seen that look before in the eyes of dingo packs and crocodiles, things that thought they were about to get an easy meal. Pain was just information. That was what Hannah had learned growing up on Earth, where everything from the plants to the weather to the animals was trying to end your life. The energy bolts that had hit her hurt. Yes, but hurt was not the same as defeated. Her body was already flooding with chemicals that would have killed most other species' adrenaline, cortisol, endorphins, and dozens of other compounds that Earth had taught humans to produce when death was close. The wounds in her shoulder and abdomen were sealing themselves as her blood vessels contracted and her healing systems went into overdrive. Her legs still worked even with the burn mark on it because human legs were built to keep working even when damaged. Lieutenant Kex stared in shock as the human straightened up instead of falling down. This was not how the training simulations had gone. Humans were supposed to be tough, yes, but 3 direct hits with military-grade energy weapons should have put any biological creature on the ground. The medical files said humans had normal pain responses, normal injury reactions, but the files had been written by scientists who studied humans in safe laboratory conditions. They had never seen what happened when a human was actually fighting for survival, when all the safety systems that evolution had built into them came online at once. Hannah looked at each of her attackers in turn. Her pupils had dilated to let in more light. Her breathing had deepened to get more oxygen to her muscles. Her heart was pumping faster, but not from fear, from anticipation. The same way it had when she tracked wounded boars through the outback or faced down pack hunters that had cornered her far from help. The maintenance bay suddenly felt much smaller. All those pipes and machines that had seemed like good cover for the ambush now looked like obstacles that would get in the way of a retreat. The blast door that was supposed to keep their crime hidden now looked like a trap that could work both ways. Sergeant Thon raised his weapon for another shot, but Hannah was already moving. She did not run toward the door trying to escape. She did not back away looking for cover. She moved toward them like something that had decided the best defense was to make sure there was no more offense. Her first step covered more ground than Thon expected. Her second step was faster than he could track. The third step brought her close enough that his energy weapon was more danger to him than to her. She grabbed the barrel of the gun and twisted it away from herself using leverage and grip strength that bent metal. The sound of Thon going down was not clean or quick like in the movies. It was ugly and brutal and final. He hit the maintenance equipment hard, enough to dent the metal casing and did not get back up. His weapon clattered across the floor, spinning under a bank of processors. Lieutenant Kex had better reflexes than his partner. He dropped his weapon and went for his combat knife, a monomolecular blade that could cut through most armor. But Hana had grown up using knives to skin crocodiles and gut fish and defend herself from things with bigger teeth and claws than any alien could manage. She caught his wrist as the knife came toward her. Throat. Her grip was steady despite the energy burns on her body. Her other hand found pressure points that humans had discovered through thousands of years of fighting each other, in addition to fighting everything else that Earth could throw at them. The knife fell from nerveless fingers. Kex followed it to the ground, clutching his arm and making sounds that his species only made when they were in more pain than their minds could process. That left Veltar alone with something that had stopped being a student and become what humans turned into when they were pushed past their limits. Something that millions of years of evolution had designed for exactly this situation. The Keth commander looked at his two fallen subordinates, then at the human who was barely breathing hard despite having just disabled two trained warriors with her bare hands. He still had his weapon, he still had training and experience, and the righteous anger that came from defending civilization against chaos. What he did not have was any understanding of what he was really facing. Hana was not angry. She was not lost in rage or battle madness. She was doing what came naturally to something that had grown up on a world where violence was just another tool for solving problems. The same way other species were naturally good at mathematics or music or engineering, humans were naturally good at breaking things that were in their way. And right now, Veltar and his xenophobic hatred were very much in her way. Veltar backed away from the approaching human, his multiple legs scrambling for purchase on the textured metal floor. This was not supposed to happen. 3 trained fighters with energy weapons against 1 injured student should have been over. In seconds, instead, his 2 best people were down and possibly dead, while the target seemed more dangerous now than when the fight started. His weapon shook in his hands as he tried to aim at the advancing human, but Hana was not moving in straight lines anymore. She flowed between the maintenance equipment using pipes and control panels as cover, moving in patterns that his eyes could not predict. His shots went wide, hitting machinery and sending sparks flying but never connecting with their target. The Keth had evolved on a world of gentle breezes and soft rains where the most dangerous predator was about the size of a house cat. They had developed intelligence and cooperation and technology to make their lives easier, not to survive. Constant threats. They were civilized precisely because they had never needed to be anything else. Humans had evolved on a world that spawned hurricanes and tornadoes where the smallest spiders could kill an adult, where the very ground, sometimes, opened up to swallow entire cities. They had developed intelligence too, but they had also kept all the other tools that nature had given them for staying alive in Hell Hana, moved through the maintenance bay like she owned it. Her childhood had been spent climbing through mine shafts and industrial equipment, helping her parents maintain terraforming machines in places where one mistake meant death. She knew how to use confined spaces, how to turn obstacles into advantages, how to make the environment work for her instead of against her. Every piece of equipment became a weapon or a shield. Every pipe became a handhold or something to swing from. Every control panel became cover or a platform to change direction. The bay that Veltar had chosen for concealment became a 3-dimensional puzzle that only one of them really understood how to solve. The shots from his energy weapon were getting wilder as panic set in. Veltar could hear his own breathing harsh and fast in the recycled air. He could smell fierce sweat and blood. His civilized mind was breaking down as millions of years of predator avoidance instincts tried to take over a body that had never needed them before. Behind him, the blast door stood sealed and impregnable. The emergency locks had engaged when the first energy weapon discharged as safety systems detected potential combat in a restricted area. The door was rated to withstand direct hits from military weapons to contain explosive decompression to hold. back anything that might threaten the rest of the station. It had never been designed to hold back a human who really wanted to get out. Hana had stopped advancing. She stood among the damaged machinery, breathing steadily, looking at Veltar with the patience of something that knew the outcome was not in doubt. She had hurt him enough. The lesson was taught, but the door was locked, and that changed everything. Humans did not like being caged. It went against something fundamental in their psychology, something that had driven them to explore every dangerous corner of their homeworld and then reach for the stars themselves. The idea of being trapped brought out reactions that were not entirely rational. Not entirely civilized, Veltar saw the change in her expression and felt his last hope die. She was not looking at him anymore. She was looking at the door, at the tons of reinforced metal that stood between her and freedom. The wounds on her body had stopped bleeding. Her breathing was controlled. Her stance was shifting from hunter to engineer. What happened next would be talked about in academy classes for decades. A human student approaching a military-grade blast door with nothing but her hands, and the kind of determination that came from growing up on a world where impossible was just another word for Tuesday. The door was designed to stop armies. It had been tested against every conceivable threat calculated to withstand forces that would crack planets. But nobody had thought to test it against a Deathworlder having the kind of bad day that made them forget about things like physics and engineering limits. Hana placed her hands on the door and began to push. The blast door had been manufactured on Kepler Station using materials that cost more than most planets' gross domestic product. The composite metal was layered with force dispersal matrices designed by the finest engineers in the galaxy, 12 separate locking mechanisms, each one capable of holding against pressures that could crush starships, were engaged and sealed. The door had a perfect safety record. In 300 years of service, doors exactly like this one had never failed. Not once they had held against direct nuclear strikes, against ramming attacks from enemy vessels, against industrial accidents that generated forces measured in megatons. None of those tests had involved a human being who was really truly angry. Hana found the stress points by instinct, the same way she had found handholds on cliff faces during her childhood. Her fingers traced the barely visible seams where different sections of the door joined together, feeling for microscopic imperfections that most creatures would never have noticed. Her palms pressed against areas where the internal structure created weak points. Human grip strength was already far beyond what most species could generate, but adrenaline pushed it into ranges that broke measuring equipment. The same chemicals that were keeping her conscious despite her injuries were also unlocking muscle capacity that normally stayed hidden behind biological safety limits. The first sound was a tiny creaking, barely audible. Over the hum of the station machinery, Veltar heard it and felt something cold settle in his stomach. That was the sound of metal under stress, more stress than it was designed to handle. The engineers who built this door had never calculated for forces applied with human leverage and desperation. Hana adjusted her grip, finding better purchase points, spreading the pressure across different areas of the door structure. She had learned these techniques from opening stuck hatches on mining, equipment from forcing jammed blast shields during dust storms, from breaking down obstacles that stood between her family and survival. The creaking got louder, joined by other sounds that Veltar had never heard before. The sharp pops of internal components reaching their breaking points, the deep groans of structural supports being pushed beyond their design limits, the high-pitched squeals of metal beginning to deform under impossible pressure systems throughout this section of the academy began registering anomalies. Stress sensors showed readings that made no sense. Computer diagnostic programs ran error checks, assuming their instruments were malfunctioning because the forces being measured were beyond anything in their databases. Hana increased her effort. Her back muscles engaged in ways that would have impressed professional strongmen. Her legs found bracing points against the floor and walls, turning her entire body into a lever system focused on one impossible goal: The burns on her body reopened as she pushed herself beyond the limits that pain was supposed to enforce. The academy had trained her in proper lifting techniques, safe exercise protocols, how to avoid injury during physical activities. But those lessons had been designed for normal times when safety mattered more than results. This was not a normal time. This was a human being pushed to the edge of her tolerance for being caged. Stress fractures began appearing in the door composite hairline cracks that spread outward from the points where Hana grip was focused. The force dispersal systems that had been designed to spread impact across the entire door structure were working backwards, channeling all of human strength into the weak points that every manufactured object possessed. Behind her, Veltar watched in growing horror as the impossible slowly became inevitable. His civilized mind could not process what he was seeing. A single biological creature attacking an immovable object, with nothing but determination and somehow winning. The sounds from the door were getting worse. Sharp cracks like breaking bones, deep metallic groans like a starship hull giving way to vacuum. The high-pitched whine of the locking mechanism struggling to hold against forces they had never been designed to resist. Hana felt the moment when the door structure began to truly fail. It was like a wall falling inside her mind, the sudden knowledge that the barrier was not as solid as it pretended to be. From that point, it was just a matter of finding the right angle, the right pressure point, the right way to turn one small failure into complete collapse. The academy shook as forces meant to be contained within the maintenance bay spread throughout the station structure. Emergency alarms began sounding as systems detected the impossible breach of a security door. Instructors and students throughout the academy stopped what they were doing as they felt the vibrations of something very large breaking apart. And in the maintenance bay, a human student named Hana Park proved that sometimes the most advanced engineering in the galaxy was no match for a Deathworlder who really needed to be somewhere else. The final failure came all at once, the way large structures always collapsed when they reached the point where physics could no longer be negotiated with or argued against. The blast door that had protected the academy for decades split along. Stress lines that followed the exact pattern of force that Hana had applied. Metal screamed as it tore apart, sending fragments spinning through the air with enough force to embed themselves in the maintenance equipment. The locking mechanisms exploded. Outward, their components scattered like shrapnel as containment systems that had held for centuries gave up all pretense of working. The sound echoed through the academy corridors, a deep, booming crash that made the entire station shake. Students in their dormitories felt their floors vibrate. Instructors in the command center watched their displays fill with error messages as sensors throughout the lower levels registered impacts that broke their measurement scales. Captain Jun Kim was running before the echoes faded. He knew that sound, somehow knew it in his bones, even though he had never heard anything like it before. It was the sound of human engineering applied to a problem that had seemed impossible. The sound of his species, doing what they did best. Finding a way through barriers that everyone else accepted as permanent security teams converged on the maintenance section from 3 different directions, their boots ringing on metal floors as they raced toward whatever disaster had just announced itself to the entire academy. But they slowed down as they got closer because the readings from their scanners made no sense. The blast door was not just open, it was gone. Scattered in pieces across the corridor outside. The maintenance bay twisted fragments of what had once been the most secure barrier on the station. The emergency containment systems were still trying to close a door that no longer existed. Hana stepped through the ruined doorway, moving carefully, around the sharp edges of torn metal. Her training uniform was torn and bloody from her injuries, but she walked with steady confidence. Her breathing was controlled, her posture straight. Her eyes held the calm satisfaction of someone who had solved a difficult problem. Behind her, the maintenance bay looked like a war zone. Two alien security officers lay motionless among sparking equipment, while a third huddled against the far wall, staring at the destruction with eyes that had seen too much. Commander Veltar was making soft noises that might have been prayers, or might have been his mind breaking under the weight of what he had witnessed. The security team leader, a veteran Thurian sergeant who had seen combat in 4 different conflicts, took one look at the scene and immediately called for medical assistance and counselors. He had dealt with industrial accidents, explosive decompression, hull breaches, and enemy attacks. But he had never seen anything like this. Captain Kim arrived. As the medical teams were checking the injured, he looked at the destroyed door, at the damaged equipment, at the 3 aliens who had apparently decided to corner a human in an isolated section of the academy. He looked at Hana, who stood calmly, answering questions from the investigators. The official report would take weeks to complete. Statements had to be taken, evidence had to be analyzed. The door fragments had to be studied by engineers who could not believe what their instruments were, telling them the Academy administration would spend months reviewing security protocols and updating their threat assessments. But Kim understood immediately what had happened. 3 aliens had made the oldest mistake in the galaxy. They had confused civilization with weakness. They had looked at humans and seen primitive, violent creatures who needed to be controlled or eliminated. They had not understood that violence and civilization could coexist in the same species. They had tried to cage, something that came from a world where being caged meant death. They had threatened something that had evolved to treat threats as problems to be solved permanently. They had cornered a predator and then acted surprised when it chose to fight, then submit. The door had been rated to stop armies. It had been built to contain explosions to hold back the vacuum of space itself. But it had one weakness that its designers had never considered. It had been built by species who understood surrender, who knew when to quit, who accepted that some barriers were meant to be permanent. Humans came from a world that did not believe in permanent barriers. They came from a species that had looked at oceans and built boats at mountains and carved tunnels, at the sky itself, and decided it was just another place to explore. When they encountered something that could not be moved, they found ways to move it anyway. As Hana walked away from the wreckage, escorted by security, but not restrained, she left. Behind more than just a destroyed door, she had changed the academy forever. Every instructor would now have to recalculate what they thought they knew about human limitations. Every security protocol would have to be rewritten to account for what a sufficiently motivated Deathworlder could accomplish, and somewhere in the databases that tracked interspecies relations, a new note was added to the human file. Warning signs that other species needed to understand before they made the same mistake that Veltar had made. The signs that said you were not dealing with just another civilized species, but with something that had learned civilization as a tool rather than a replacement for the survival skills that had carried them across the galaxy. The Academy would rebuild. The door would be replaced with something stronger. Veltar and his followers would face justice for their attack, but the lesson would remain written in twisted metal and impossible physics. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the galaxy was not a weapon or a warship, but a human being who really truly needed to be somewhere else.